be talking about now, I was not personally involved with, but it happened at a lab that I used to work at. So hopefully I can understand it well enough to explain it to you all. Okay, so to get started, we'll talk about some of the basics. So dengue fever, I'm sure you all know, very terrible disease, and the World Health Organization says it's going to be a major problem this century. It's really spreading rapidly, especially with climate change. Normally the mortality is not too high, it's only about 1% when it's well managed, but it can be much higher when you get complications happening. So talking about some of the symptoms, we have sudden onset fever, headache, sweating, muscle pains, vomiting, rash, lots of nasty things, and it gets even worse if you go to the critical phase. You can start getting your blood vessels rupturing and things like this, and that's when it becomes a health issue, like a life-threatening one. So looking at the distribution, it's endemic in about 100 countries in the planet, which is about 1 in every 2 countries. We've got this heat map, so red is very high risk and prevalence, so Cambodia is right in there, Central America. About 50 to 100 million people get infected each year, and about 25,000 people die from this. So it's quite a problem. So this is the villain. It's a dengue RNA virus. So it mutates quite quickly. You can see it here. And this is inside a cell. We can see lots of little virus particles hanging out together, having a good old time. There's 4 different flavors of dengue now. So if you get infected with one, you'll get immune to that, but you'll become more susceptible to the others. So it's really annoying. This is the mosquito that transmits it. Its name is Aedes aegypti. You can recognize it from these white dots. Is the best thing. It lives for about 1 month, and it's only the females that actually bite. So you can blame the girls if you get bitten or get dengue fever. Okay, the life cycle. So you have a mosquito here. It comes along and it bites somebody who already has dengue fever. So it takes in their blood with the little dengue particles. It takes about 8 to 10 days, and the dengue particles, they multiply. They move to the salivary glands. So then when the mosquito bites another person, it passes on the dengue like that. So far, the vaccination attempts have been completely unsuccessful. So dengue is 1, science 0. All we have available is using nets and trying to tip out any stagnant water where they like to lay their eggs, and chemicals, things like that. So it's not a great situation right now. Okay, but we have a new character in the ring. Its name is Wolbachia, and it's a little bacteria that lives inside about 60% of insect species. So butterflies, dragonflies, but not the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And this is an insect cell, and it's a bit hard to see, but there's 3 Wolbachia in there. These big blue things are cells, and lots of little Wolbachia. So it's a harmless parasite, pretty much, and sometimes scientists think strange things, like, what if I took some Wolbachia from a fly and I put that in the mosquito, which doesn't already have one? And I don't know who had this idea or why, but they did that, and they found something quite interesting out when they did this. So it's a bit hard to see, but this is a slide of ovaries from a few different mosquitoes. Dengue is red and Wolbachia is green. It's actually all over here. And what you see, there's heaps of dengue in this one ovary, which has no Wolbachia, but everywhere else, no dengue whatsoever. So somehow the 2 of them can't live together and be friends. And they don't quite know the reason for this, but it looks like they actually fight with each other. And this kind of makes sense. They're both parasites. They want to live inside this mosquito, and they don't want to really share the house and the resources. So somehow Wolbachia can suppress dengue and be the only one that wins out. Okay, so in effect, this kind of works like a vaccination for the mosquitoes, and it stops dengue. These are ovary cells again, and you see lots of green Wolbachia, and this means it passes down the generations. So, sorry for the Spanish, if you have a female dengue mosquito, and she mates with a normal male, all the offspring will have Wolbachia as well. And even more interesting and kind of cool from a genetics point of view, if you have a male with Wolbachia, and it mates with a normal female, all her offspring die. So it's kind of a way of really taking the normal dengue mosquitoes out of the breeding pool. So scientists sort of noticed this and they thought, well, this could actually have an amazing application. And just to review, if a Wolbachia mosquito bites somebody with dengue, it still takes in their blood, it has the dengue particles, but somehow the Wolbachia blocks it off. So when that mosquito bites another person, they don't get sick, which is really great. So what their plan was, they thought, if we could breed up a whole lot of these Wolbachia mosquitoes and release them into a wild population, it would spread and replace all of the normal ones. All the mosquitoes would become infected, and dengue couldn't live anymore. So in 2011, they did a release at these two places in my home country, Yorkeys Knob and Gordon Vale, which is where cane toads were catastrophically released in 1935. And they did releases over 2 or 3 months, in Yorkeys Knob at the top and Gordon Vale down the bottom. And unfortunately the heat map has been cut off, but what they see is across this time Wolbachia spread and spread and became more and more prevalent, which we'll see even better in the next slide. Okay, so this is from January until about March. These grey bars show how many mosquitoes were released, and this is 10,000 up to about 20,000. And this green line shows they monitored the prevalence of Wolbachia. And by the end, by about April or May, it was sitting around about 95-100%. And they've since found that that's being stably maintained at those levels. So something else which is potentially amazing or potentially scary, depending how you feel about this, is that they've also found gene flow. So these mosquitoes, they fly a little ways and they're spreading this Wolbachia to other mosquito populations. So slowly this is spreading across northeastern Australia, and presumably at some point Wolbachia will be completely there, so there'll be no more dengue. Okay, moving forwards. The plan is, right now, they're doing a release of this in Southeast Asia, I believe Malaysia, using sort of local mosquitoes and trying to roll it out. And if that's effective, I imagine it's going to keep going across the world. So we're really hopeful that dengue won't be a big problem in the future. Just really quickly, they're also going to try and switch this across to the malaria mosquito, which would be even better. But that work's still a while off. Thank you.
Thanks, man. That was really educational. How do you put Wolbachia in a mosquito? Do you have to get like a little mosquito syringe and like go to town, or what?
Yeah. So bacteria have a sort of different genome to mosquitoes. It's a round one. So you can do some clever techniques to extract that, and then it's a syringe. You inject it into eggs. And when they grow up, they have it and pass it down to the next generation. Yeah.
All right, so you just like spray it on the eggs. I know that mosquitoes bit more than one person. That's gross. Does that happen a lot? Like, why? Why do mosquitoes bite more than one person? That just seems like kind of slutty to me or something. I don't know.
Yeah, it's completely vile. Also, dengue, it can't actually pass down generations, so it always needs to keep switching back and forth between a mosquito and between people. It doesn't actually get into the ovaries or the reproductive sort of line. So it's always, when a mosquito bites somebody, it goes into the mosquito's intestines and sort of leaks out and works its way up to the salivary glands, where it then spreads to the next person. So it's somehow evolved this way.
So from like an evolutionary standpoint, did dengue evolve as a mosquito disease or as a person disease or as something, do they know?
So geneticists, they think it actually evolved in the 1800s, sometime in Africa, from, I believe, a monkey virus of some sort, which managed to make it jump across to humans. It's a common sort of thing, like we see with bird flu and other viruses. Often it'll come from us. AIDS. Yeah, good one. Good example.
Not very good example. Other questions about dengue, because he knows all of them. Yes.
I just got out of the hospital last month for dengue. I looked at the speed and okay, you take a spray, it's a drag. Yeah. So this was really interesting. Thank you so much. Not really a question.
Not really a question. Just rock on good dengue talk.
Whatever that thing that you sprayed on the slutty mosquitoes. Keep that up.
Slutty mosquitoes, yeah. Go help. Yeah. We squeeze the virus, what is it? A bacteria.
Yeah.
Squeeze the bacteria in their eggs.
Just keep spraying that stuff. Malaysia, bring it up to Thailand, bring it on over.
Cut it out already. Yeah. Okay. Good non-question. Thank you. Yes. Does Wolbachia have an impact on humans?
No, it's exclusively an insect pathogen, and even inside insects, it doesn't really do anything. it's a bit like, I've heard this figure, if you count all the cells inside your body, about 9 out of every 10 will not be human cells. We're filled with all sorts of bacteria that live inside us, and so this is just a friendly, fairly peaceful insect bacteria. So as far as all the risk assessments have shown, there's no risk of impact to humans from this.
So is that why we couldn't, like, I couldn't inject myself, or James couldn't have injected himself with Wolbachia a couple weeks ago and not gotten dengue? Is that why?
Yeah, so I guess the environment of our cells is not amenable to Wolbachia surviving. So they can't live inside human cells for a whole bunch of biochemical reasons.
Bad news, dude. Other question. And Stan, did you have a question? Answered. All right. Other questions? Yes.
So do you have dengue in Australia, and does this program actually decrease the number of cases?
Oh yeah, that's a good question. Did the program of releasing Wolbachia mosquitoes, did it have an impact on dengue cases, or was it just kind of cool and interesting?
Yeah, so the reason for the release in Australia was mostly that a lot of the research has happened down there with funding from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. But we do have dengue in Queensland, especially the areas where it got released. Treatment is very good up there, so it almost never results in mortality. But there are occasional cases. It's definitely not at the levels of Cambodia. So the releases were done in 2011, and I'm not quite sure what the data are for how much it's reduced cases, but it's pretty close to 100% that Wolbachia mosquitoes can't also carry dengue. So yeah, it's been a roaring success so far, and it's looking really good at this point.
What is it about dengue? Because James had dengue, my roommate had dengue, and they didn't die. What is it that makes people die from dengue? Do you know?
So the only time that dengue can become a real problem is if you get this particular form called hemorrhagic dengue fever, which is where your red blood cells, or like your capillaries and everything, start to become leaky, and your blood can escape out of that, and that's what causes the rash that you see sometimes. Yeah, I should definitely know this. I think it might actually be the dengue gets into your blood cells, but I don't know for sure.
So is that like dengue progresses to a certain level where you're just like leaking blood, or is it a different kind of dengue that James apparently didn't have?
So there's 4 different varieties, or they're called serotypes, and they're all about as dangerous as each other. So it just depends on the individual, how good your immune system is, how big a dosage you get when the mosquito bites you, and things like that. So if you're lucky, your immune system can sort of fight it off before it gets to that level. But some people, especially if they're immunosuppressed or something like that, it can actually escalate to that higher level.
Yeah. All right. You had a question?
I'm just curious about the cost or the cost effectiveness of this treatment.
Good question. Yeah. What is the cost effective? How much does it cost to squirt this bacteria into the mosquito eggs? And is it cost effective?
Well, that's a really good question. And one of the coolest things about this is if we had succeeded in making a vaccine, as has been attempted for many years now, that would be something that would have to be rolled out to billions of people on an ongoing basis. But as we've seen so far, the mosquitoes get immunized instead, and they spread it themselves. So once it's established, it will essentially be free of charge to do this. Mosquitoes, they're quite cheap to breed up. So there's not really any, now that it's actually established and we have strains of mosquitoes that have this bacteria inside them, the main thing is just to feed them human blood, which is a bit of an unpleasant thing. So I've seen people in the lab, they have the plastic boxes with the mosquitoes, and they have to pay people off the streets to come in and stick their arm in there for about half an hour just to keep because mosquitoes do need blood to keep their life cycle going and lay eggs. So yeah, it's very cheap. It's extremely cheap, which is amazing, especially once it does spread.
It's disgusting.
Yeah, I never did that.
Okay. Other questions? Yes.
It's so common. I was surprised that when I was in the dengue ward here in the hospital in Battambang, that the dengue patients were not inside mosquito nets. So it just seems like that, could probably spread dengue to other patients in the hospital who don't have it. And they were just in an open ward with no
That's right. Yeah. Oh, yeah. No, that's a good point. So she was in a dengue ward in Battambang, and did you have dengue? You had dengue?
I had dengue, but not like
Bummer.
at that time. I was there as an observer. I was there for like a journalism thing. But
Oh,
it
yeah.
would be like a long time ago.
Okay, so she had dengue and then didn't go to the dengue ward. And then when she didn't have dengue, she went to the dengue ward. And everyone's hanging out with no mosquito nets, probably because they think that they've already got as dengue up as they're going to get. But really, the problem is that the mosquitoes are going to bite them and transmit it to someone else. What can we do to mitigate the spread of dengue better? Do you see that a lot in your research?
Yeah, well, that's actually a really good point. I think when you do get dengue, it's so awful, and you're sometimes you can't really be just hanging on there by a thread. So people aren't sort of thinking about keeping mosquitoes away from you. They're just trying to keep you, hydrated and everything. But as I mentioned, dengue only does spread from an infected person getting bitten and then it going to another person. So it's probably a practice that could be better done, putting mosquito nets around people that are already sick, or chemical sprays, anything that is used right now at a much higher level, especially in hospitals where you have lots of sick people. But short of that, it's still very hard to control the spread. It's just, trying to get rid of any stagnant water. That's a very effective method. And nets, DEET. Yeah, there's not very much that we can do right now.
Cool. You and then you. Yeah.
Is there any danger that long-term effects of releasing those mosquitoes, historically when you release something in the wild, it causes other effects, like they've done other animals?
Well, yeah. What kind of long-term side effects can we expect from releasing modified mosquitoes into the wild?
Yeah, I was actually amazed to hear that they got the license to do this, especially in Queensland, where it's been devastated by the cane toad being released back in the 30s. One thing about this is it's actually legally and sort of technically it's not an introduced species, so the mosquitoes will still be there. The ones with Wolbachia, they're about as strong and as good at surviving as the normal ones. So the hope is that you can essentially maintain the same population levels of mosquitoes and just kind of switch one parasite to another one. It's also not actually a modified organism, so there's been no genetic manipulation. It's just one little bacteria has been changed inside them.
It's just the Keanu Reeves meme had the idea to put it in from one bug into another.
Yeah. So they've done, I saw the risk assessments that they did, which were these massive, thick, 500-page documents, and it's always hard to say definitively, but as far as science can tell, there shouldn't be a risk of this, we don't think, but famous last words.
And you're still not making a way to decrease the total number of mosquitoes, which bums me out, frankly.
Yeah, but it means that natural food chains and things like that don't get disrupted. So other insects that feed on mosquitoes, they'll still be able to survive and get by in the same levels. So it's probably the smallest amount of tampering with nature that could be done to still achieve this.
Right. The part of nature that we would most want to tamper with. Yes?
Well, I like the idea of having the mosquitoes do the work for us. So should there be like a line of research where we actually give mosquitoes these vaccines and they're just going to fly around and bite us and actually, give us beneficial immunity?
Yeah, no, I think what he's getting at is, so like what else could we put in mosquitoes to screw with them and give us stuff, right?
That's a very interesting idea that I'd never thought of. You'd probably have a bit of a PR campaign there to convince people, yes, you should be letting these mosquitoes bite you. They're just little doctors that are flying around. That's great. I think you should write a novel about that or something.
It's like Spider-Man. Other questions? Mosquito Man, I guess. Yes?
Australia is not endemic dengue, is that right?
Just in the Queensland, essentially.
In that area?
Yeah, it's not further south.
I wasn't sure about that. Have there been any studies in Central America or Southeast Asia for the same kind of release?
So they found, because of the success in Australia, they're doing a release now. I believe they've chosen 3 sites in Malaysia, first of all. It takes a while because they like to catch local mosquitoes and then transfer the Wolbachia across in the lab via breeding and then re-release the local ones so they're as close as possible to the ones in the natural habitat. So I think the data, or like that experiment, is still ongoing, and after that happens, they'll probably just keep rolling it out. So maybe a decade or 2 decades, this could be a really big thing that we see in lots of places. But yeah, it is slow, unfortunately.
Who named it Wolbachia?
I have no idea. It's just one of these standard scientific sort of names.
Other questions? Mosquitoes, Wolbachia. This guy seems to be pretty well versed in a lot of stuff. Yeah? Okay, cool. That was awesome. Thank you so much.